Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adi, and today I have another team report from Fort Wayne Regionals, and I'm joined by another top player. I'm joined by Luka. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Just was playing my IC games earlier, so just kind of trying to get off of that train for a little bit right now.
For sure. And so, for those who don't know you, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been playing the game since way back in like 2014. I first started out as a senior. I ended up going to Fort Wayne Regionals in like 2015. I somehow ended up winning that one in senior. So I'm like, oh, I thought I did pretty decently for my first event. So I just kind of like kept going from there. Um, After that, I kind of just took a break after I entered Masters, kind of came back at around 2019, 2020 when like, Sword and Shield was still popping up.
Hmm.
Then obviously pandemic hit. Obviously I took like a break for not out of my own volition, but kind of just came back in 2022. And then we just kind of been trying to go hard in 2023. So just that's kind of been how my season so far has spanned.
Yeah, and you had a really, really crazy 2 week span where in Series 2, of course, you got all the way to top four of Charlotte Regionals. You went 13-1 in Swiss, which is an absolutely insane record. And then a week later, moving forward into Series 3, completely different format, but you managed to replicate that success, getting top four at Fort Wayne Regionals just a week later with a very similar team. And I know you asked me after the Series 2 event, Charlotte, if we wanted to do a team report, and I was like, yeah, like who really wants to who really cares about series two? It's, there's like 3 days left of
Yeah.
it. And then you just said, hey, what if I do the exact same thing? I'm going to prove to you that this team is still relevant. And you popped off with almost the exact same thing in series three. So just a really, really impressive couple of weeks. So yeah, so talk to me about how you approached these two events and what your team building looked like for these events.
So team building for Charlotte, we were how it started out was like initially when I was like starting to build a team. I was actually testing around with my friend Zach Techno Z. And it was early format, so this is still when we thought Garganackle was still like the best mon in the format, early format, and I just couldn't break it. So I was just like trying to theory of like ways how I could like break it with like the current iteration I had in my team, and I eventually realized like, well, if I can like attack it and then I can use assurance with Kingambit, I can probably get a KO with it. But I need to like actually like up the damage output on it. So I decided to just go with like Black Glasses and Dark Terra. So like that seems like reasonable. I was just getting consistent one shots, and that's sort of like how the idea of like Black Glasses, Terra Dark Kingambit came to be, was from that. And then through testing around, I found out assurance wasn't that great, and then I found out like Swords Dance can kind of just like put up some win cons in scenarios where you can just, if not much is happening in a turn, you can just kind of set up a sword sense and then just kind of go ham from there. Um, I just from like testing around, I just found that like Fluttermane, Arcanine, and Mungus paired with Kingambit was just a very, how we see from like Palathin nowadays is like just very consistent with those three. Anything you really just pair them with. And then just through testing, I wanted to like answer Talon Tusk really handily, so I just threw on a bundle in there. And to just like round out some like certain matchups Dragonite was put in, it was decent into side spam because obviously multi-scale, Assault Vest, Ice Spinner was just really good into side spam to eliminate terrain, and so it's a lot more manageable to deal with. And it was also just good to have a ground resist, also for just handling Tusk better. And just having like a secondary strong attacker when like Kingambit wouldn't come, just because sometimes you wouldn't have the coverage with Kingambit just because you are mono dark on that thing. But ultimately, I just wanted to make like the most well-rounded team I could do, have answers to like as many possible situations as I could, and overall, I felt very confident in the team and its matchups. Like there wasn't a single matchup I played the entirety of Charlotte where I didn't think like I couldn't win. You know?
I will say I played you at Charlotte. You were my one loss in day one Swiss, and that was the only matchup that I looked at and said I don't think I can win against this. So I thought the team was crazy and super well built for the series two metagame.
I think it was just kind of just the process because I used this same six throughout the entirety of series two. Like at Orlando, at Knoxville, and at like I had different sets throughout the entire like at each one, different items, different terror types, stuff like that. But like I think like Charlotte was like the culmination of me understanding what was wrong with the sets that I had before and like putting like the correct sets onto them. I think overall, I think this is like probably the best the iteration like of the team would ever went. Like, but also, man, our Swiss match was scary. I was scared as hell as soon as I pulled up you. Like,
Yeah. Thankfully, we were both 7-0, and it wasn't a super stressful game. But yeah.
mhm.
So of course, like 13-1 in Charlotte, just a crazy strong run. And then of course after that, again, we had a week turnaround before Fort Wayne, completely different format. Did you play a lot of Regulation C in the lead up to Fort Wayne regionals?
Absolutely not. I had zero time between because obviously we had a week. I had to catch up on some schoolwork and I also had just my job to attend to. So every single day after like between Sunday to Friday, I was either working or at school. So I think I got like before like the car ride there, where I was like we had 3 hours. I think I played like 10 games total of Series 3. Um, I had an idea of the format just from like my friends talking about it, and like Chen Pao, they know from playing like Series Zero when we still had that. Like Chen Pao D Knight, like Chi Yu Flutter, like I knew about those being things I'd have to answer, but I didn't really get many games to play, so it was like kind of just figuring things out in the car ride. So it was just it was me and Ashton Cox. We were just driving down into Fort Wayne. We were both building our teams because we both didn't have time just driving in that car ride, and we were just kind of like he was trying to sell me on using the same four of Kingambit, Fluttermane, Amoonguss, Arcanine, like those four, and he was trying to sell me on using Chen Pao Azu because he's like, oh, Azu's great into Flutter Chi Yu, the Assault Fist, you can take the hits and stuff, but I'm just like, Azu's just not that great of a mon, just even like the 5 games I played with it. So I was like, okay, so what if we just put like Ting Lu on there, to like answer like Flutter Chi Yu, to have like something really solid that can like, take hits from that. And then what if we just had Palathin to just kind of clean up after Tinglu did like the damage that was needed? And after testing with that, it did probably the best performing out of like the 2-3 teams total that I've tested. So I'm like, I think this is it.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people probably went into this regional without a ton of preparation, but
Yeah.
I got to imagine that your experience using a very similar team, obviously a very similar King Gambit set, probably
Mhm.
helped you throughout your run.
Yeah, familiarity was like a big factor when going into like the team. I didn't want to stray too far from it. I still wanted to kind of just stick into like a general like balanced core of just like being able to pivot, being able to like take hits and stuff like that. And from like what I tested, Palafin was really good into like some of the talent stuff that was popping up around. Obviously if you can have late game Palafin, you can jet punch your way through like Talon Claim, Great Tusk, stuff like that. Um, Ting Lu was just like anytime I play with him, I was just amazed at how well this thing took hits. Like I would just see a bundle come in, it would do like I'd say like less than 20% with a freeze draw, and I'm just like, God, jeez, that's just way too much. But so I knew I wanted to use Ting Lu after seeing like what it could do with that. And then there was just also like, just some cheeky other text having Ting Lu be faster than King Gambit. I think Ashton came up with the idea so you can actually ruin Nation kowtow things in order to like just pick up some knockouts that people wouldn't expect. Um, I think. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention about the howl. The howl was a funny one because we got into Fort Wayne. It was like 11 o'clock, and obviously we were panicking because we were playing games and we were losing. And we're like, we don't know what to do, and then we just see. We actually stole the idea. I saw a paste that my friend Z sent, and she had howl on her Arcanine, and we're like, we're stealing it. So so we just put Howl on our Arcanine, and I really wanted to just kind of have I ultimately wanted to just see if I could go at least 6-3 at the event because that would be enough to get my Worlds invite, which is ultimately the goal. I think like if I could just squeeze out 6-3, get my Worlds invite, I'd be ultimately happy. So I think Howl was just me wanting to say I wanted to have fun with this regional because Howl was just a very fun move. Anytime I clicked it, if you pair it next to King Gambit, it obviously does insane damage. If you pair it next to late game Palafin, obviously Wave Crash is gonna kill things that KO things that just should not be getting KO'd. And next to Ting Lu, like the ultimate idea was next to Ting Lu because you have Flying Terra, so you can like just howl and then EQ and make Ting Lu a offensive threat while also being a very potent defensive threat. And that was just like ultimately the idea. Howl didn't come up as often as I would have liked, but it still came up a few games and was really clutch in like certain like stall matchups where it was just hard to break through things. But yeah, I ultimately that was like how I wanted to round it out. I wanted Booster Flutter to just have consistent damage output while also being able to take hits. I EV to live Ice Spinner, which obviously was relevant in my game versus Justin Tang, where I took the Ice Spinner from his Chen Pao. So it was just a standard Flutter main, just live the things I wanted it to live, and then just do as much damage as you can. And then Amoongus was just there to round it out. I'm such a big fan of Rocky Helmet Amoongus, by the way. Like being able to answer like break Shen Pao's sash is such a big clutch thing that actually came up like a couple times. And being able to just solidly chip down like balance cores, like if an Arcanine Flare Blitz you -1, it takes like 50% of its own health. You pivot back, have it do it again. Like I think it's just such a good way to like defensively pressure things that Amoongus normally can't. And I think that's especially important for like Kingambit when it can't answer things like Iron Hand super well. So like ultimately I think like the team just balanced out very well just because it was something I'm used to. Just has a lot of good type synergy and a lot of good coverage, and it's just overall just a very bulky is able to like live throughout the rest of the game, which I think was like ultimately my goal.
Absolutely. And so you talked about the Flutter main set and a little bit about what the EV spreads do on like Tinglu and King Gambit.
Mm-hmm.
But can you talk me through the rest of the Pokemon and maybe why you chose the moves that you did, especially the like less standard ones, like you don't have Protect on Arcanine, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe why you made some of the choices that you did in your team.
Let's see. So no protect on Arcanine was mostly just to fit Howl on the team. I wanted obviously you have to have Flare Blitz, and it was kind of just like a toss up between was it going to be Extreme Speed or Protect, and ultimately I thought if you're going to be clicking Howl with this Mon, I feel like E Speed just felt like necessary. If you're going to get your obviously like Howl is mostly to set up your own Mons, but it gives Arcanine the +1 as well. So like if Arcanine can get one or two Howls off, like sudden you can have +2 Extreme Speeds, which just sounded too good in my mind to pass up.
Mm-hmm.
So I ultimately decided to go without Protect, which I think is a decision I think I regret overall. I like there were a lot of games where Arcanine not being able to protect was kind of huge, and I had to play around that, which really sucked in a lot of ways. Um, that so I ultimately, if I had to like say I had one regret, it would be that and also Steel Tear on Amoongus. That was an idea that I got convinced on, and then the idea was like answer Chen Pao Dragonite as like more effectively, I guess. But ultimately, I think it ended up not being as great, especially when there were times I was like really wishing I was Terra Water into like Chi Yu, especially because I was always weak to fire no matter what. And I'm like, this is not great. So Steel is also a big regret. I wish that was Water or something along the lines to answer Chi Yu better, because ultimately I still felt like I had a good matchup into Chen Pao Dragonite. Like the EVs on Amoongus was obviously like to just be as like kind of physically bulky as possible while still still having some decent special bulk. The force Spadef and the force being special attack was mostly just like a cute little thing, because the thing is there's so many situations I came into where my own Amoongus outspeeding opposing Amoongus was actually really clutch, because there would be some times like I'd get like a double into a KO on a Mon when they're like trying to side Pollen Puff, just because like Pollen Puff or Amoongus is able to edge out that KO, and then they waste the turn with their Amoongus, and then like ultimately from there, like the force speed EDs ultimately doesn't lose you anything on Amoongus, like calc wise or anything like that. So like ultimately knowing that I could like outspeed other Amoongus, just having that force speed just like made certain situations easier. Like I could just know about that.
That is something
Um,
that Nails and I were doing at Orlando Regionals, actually, where we were like, yeah,
mhm.
we should put like a little bit of speed creep on our Mogus, 4 speed EVs on our Mogus, so that we're faster than opposing a Mogus. So if they Terra to like dodge an attack, like dodge like an ice attack from our bundle or something, then we can pin it with Spore. And if they get KO'd, then the Spore gets redirected. But if not, then we always get the Spore off. And that was something that we thought was a really valuable as well.
Yeah, yeah. Like being anytime I see like a Mungus, like Terra or anything like that, and just knowing that like I can spore them before they can spore me or something like that is just really, really valuable to know. Uh, so that was like mostly it for the Mungus. Arcanine was just general like bulk all around. I think you always take choice band E speed from Dragonite when Chen Tao's on the field. So like that was basically the baseline. Then you just have like enough speed to most outspeed most like speed creeping Dragonite, because I know Dragonites were trying to speed creep each other with trying to get E speed off first. So the idea was just if you can clutch out a KO against opposing Dragonites with getting your own E speed off, like that was it. And then just like some general Spadef and attack, just like to fill the rest of it in. Palafin just about as standard as you can get. I don't think there's really much need to vary this mon. This thing is here to live as long as possible and to hit as hard as possible, and I don't think you should really change that. Um, like Ting Lu, I also wanted it to hit as hard as possible, just because like after you give it an assault vest and you give it max special defense, there's not much of a need to invest in like its other defensive stats. It's already so like tanky just naturally that you kind of just get less cost return out of it. Like you'd ultimately take probably like 2% less if you go like max HP against certain moves, which like didn't seem worth it. I think it just like next to Howl and next to like giving this mon as much offensive pressure as possible while like still being very bulky, I think was like probably the way I wanted to go. Like even though you like a lot of times it came down to like clicking Ruination or something like that, I still think like consistently like I was able to like consistently two shot any every Iron Hands I fought with stopping Tantrum. um I was able to like against like a game plan like against like Chiyu Flutter, like, and that's a big reason why I actually have Earthquake over something else, was the fact that like you could just protect with your opposing mon and then just Earthquake with your Ting Lu, and that would usually put those mons into range of like either your Palafin Jet Punch or your Kingambit Sucker Punch, or like Arcanine Extreme Speed. Like it was just really useful to be able to like protect EQ in a lot of situations that I actually like just solo one me one of my rounds, just because like the fact that like I could just EQ spam through the redirection and no, they can really stop that. So like ultimately I was like very happy with like the Ting Lu set, and then Grass Terror was just to be immune to Spore, and also like to answer, because I saw a bunch of Grass Dozo popping up on ladder, and I was like, if Palafin can't really answer Grass Dozo because it gets the Terra Blast off and you can't redirect it, so I'm like, I really want a secondary way to deal with that if I ever fight it. So Grass Terror Ting Lu was just kind of like a good way, just a good solid defensive type, and then also just check that matchup. So like ultimately I was happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then King Gambit spread was just to like hit as hard and live as hard as possible. I wanted to just go max attack because those were all the calcs that I knew. If I debated going like specially defensive set with less attack, but like it wouldn't hit the benchmarks that I would have wanted, and like ultimately you just miss out on a lot of KOs. Like there's like certain KOs that are like really feel necessary, like almost always KOing Talonflame if you Dark Terra with a Kowtow Cleave. Potentially be able to one shot Fairy Terra Flutter mains with Sucker Punch if you're at +2. Like that one's really important, just because like you can just edge out a KO and suddenly they burn their Terra and lose their Flutter main all in the same turn. And also like certain other calcs, like being able to KO Amoonguss at +1 if you get a Howl off or get an Intimidate off on yourself. Like there's just so many situations that getting any kind of like any amount of boosts on yourself just edges out KOs completely in your favor. There's just so many KOs that you just get straight up on Pokemon that aren't as bulky or aren't as invested. Like when you, and especially when you're dark, like I think Kingambit Terra is the most out of any other on my team. So like when you're Dark Terra, when you're Black Glasses, and when you're using Kowtow Cleave, I never just saw a need to have like Iron Head like ever, because the only fairy type in the format also is neutral to dark. So like I felt like any other time I felt like anything else, I thought just dealing strong neutral damage was just always just better for the most part, because it answered most general situations, and any situation that was awkward for not having like Iron Head or low kick or anything like else, I was just like try and circumvent that with the rest of the team. Like that's again why a big reason why I had Rocky Helmet and Amoonguss, because it helps circumvent the things that I can't hit like Iron Hands. So like overall I think like the team was sort of built in mind with the idea of like live as long as possible, chip the opponent down as much as possible with things like Ruination with Fluttermane, Rocky Helmet, Amoonguss, and Arcanine, and then just kind of let your big sweepers like Palafin and Kingambit just clean up in the back. I think that was like ultimately the game plan of like how the team was supposed to be structured like in the end, and that's ultimately how I think I ended up winning most of my games. Just kind of it would almost feel like in the first half of the game I'm losing just because I'm like taking a lot of damage. I'm not necessarily dealing a lot of damage back, but like overall, like, but when I bring out like two of my Pokemon left, and it's like Palafin and Kingambit, all the opponent's Pokemon are like 50-40%. I just kind of just click Jet Punch and Sucker Punch and then just get the game from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, you talked about a click and Earthquake on Tinglu. I totally agree. I was running Earthquake at Fort Wayne as well. I thought it was a fantastic move to get that spread damage.
Mm-hmm.
It has a base one
It's
to
so
attack
good.
that. It does damage, but like on stream, they asked Nails, they asked Wolf, they actually brought me and Kyle on and asked us about this too, about Fissure.
Mm-hmm.
It was the big discussion
Yeah.
point of the week. Obviously, we both had our fair experience with Fissure that
Oh boy,
weekend.
yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about, you obviously don't have it. Tell me about
Mm-hmm.
if you ever considered Fissure and what your opinions are about the move on Tinglu, because that is just the talking point of VGC right now.
So don't worry, I wrote a list down. Don't you worry. I wrote not about my team. I wrote a list about Fissure. So obviously, I think in recorded history, I am the most fissured player, just that we have documented. So I feel like I can speak on this. One thing I have to say about Fissure is that I think it's a I think an argument I hear about Fissure a lot is that you only need you only really use it in situations where you have to, if you want edge out a win otherwise. And I think that's actually kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where you putting Fissure on Ting Lu will actually inherently make you be in more situations where you have to click Fissure. Like I think if you were to run something else let's say let's say like in my game versus Fiona, for example, like let's say she had like body press on her Tinglu instead of Fissure or something like that. Like I think that would like be able to she'd be able to game plan around a situation more where she'd be able to like body press my Kingambit down or like force it to Terra or do 50% to it even if I do Terra. Like where she wouldn't even necessarily need Fissure in the first place to actually answer it. Like I think when you have and I think it just inherently like cuts off your options, because now you have an option that you're likely not going to click unless you have to, which inherently cuts off the options that you have in a game. You have 16, you have 4 moves per Pokemon, 4 Pokemon in a game, so 16 moves total. So that's like inherently like kind of one move you're leaving out. So that's like a resource that you're leaving out, which inherently like makes situations harder to deal with and harder to game plan around, which just inherently will make it mean you have to click Fissure in situations where I think you otherwise wouldn't have. That's a big thing about that. And I think also it's just in general suboptimal. I think how I with Earthquake, for example, answer like a situation that I was having trouble with Chiyu Fluttermane, it helped make that situation more consistent. And I think just overall there's just other options on Tinglu that are just better overall, like EQ for having spread damage, body press for being able to answer opposing dark types better. Even if you go even something like if you decide to go leftovers, even something like substitute or something like that, I think there's just better consistent options that you can actually game plan around and then be able to effectively deal with an opponent with an actual more effective game plan than kind of putting yourself into situations where you're forced to Fissure,
Mm-hmm.
So I think overall I think Fissure will drop down as we go on more and more and people figure out more about how Tinglu should fit on teams and what to do with it. But ultimately, I do think Fissure is just not an optimal move, and I think there will be better use cases for other moves as we go along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I mean, you obviously you don't have a dark move, you have Urination, which is kind of a dark move, but Throat Chop and
Yeah,
Payback, I feel like we're both really strong on Tinglu as well. You mentioned Body Press is a really strong option. We saw
yeah,
Nails do well. Stealth Rock on Tinglu. Protect is a good move if you don't
yeah.
have a Stealth Vest. So I really do think the mod has so many options that you get to run. And
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. I think Fissure is a little too high rolly, but also obviously it can. We both have lost to it, and we both have seen what it can do
Yeah.
if you're running hot on a good day. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
So let's talk about how to play the team itself. Obviously, it's got this really powerful defensive core, and so it seems like you have some amount of flexibility. But did you have any
yeah.
go-to game plans when you were playing the team, or any matchups where you felt like you were forced to play in a very specific way?
So there are a few. Obviously, we don't have a defined meta yet. So there wasn't really super like, you have these two for this, you have this for that. It was mostly just kind of like answer as many things as you generally can as possible, just because there wasn't really a meta yet, so we're just kind of like throwing a bunch of things at the wall and just seeing what sticks. So like for like for like the certain like things that we did kind of have defined, like Chen Pao Dragonite, normally like the game plan to that would be something either like lead Flutter Mane Arcanine, get the Intimidate off, have the immunity to Extreme Speed, or something along the lines of like lead, depending on like what their other mounts would be, lead like Flutter Mane Palafin, because then you just immediately swap into Arcanine, you get your hero form off, and then you get the Intimidate, you can Dazzling Gleam, you live the Ice Spinner. If he locks into Extreme Speed, then you obviously you can break down the Sash on the Chen Pao, and that means your Arcanine threatens decay on the Chen Pao with its Extreme Speed, which then you can just kind of go from there, because like it'll either force the Dragonite to switch out, which you can capitalize on, or like force the Chen Pao to protect. Like, so ultimately, like that was just kind of just a standard, just like leave Flutter Mane Arcanine. In the case of like Chi-Yu Flutter Mane or something like similar to that, like those very strong special offensive cores, it would usually be something along the lines of like lead like Ting Lu Palafin, where again ultimately like the first turn play would always just be like Earthquake Protect, because it was just generally very safe. And like a lot of Chi-Yu or Flutter Mane, like a lot of times one of them had a choice item, either like the Chi would have a scarf, or the Flutter Mane would have a choice spec. So usually, like it was just very safe to just get damage on at least one of them, and if not both, if they decide to not protect. In which case, like they would, if it didn't KO the Chi because it was like Sash or something, you can just pick it off with a Jet Punch from Palafin. You live an attack from one or the other if you don't KO it, because you have Ting Lu on the field. You can then KO at that slot. You can pivot your Palafin out on the other two into like Arcanine, something like that, and just go from there. So ultimately, like against that, it's just like lead Ting Lu, have it help all your other mons live, have it live, and then just like go from there. Um, Against like, if there are any other like super specific courses against like opposing balance, so against anything like similar to this, obviously there were like a bunch of like the same compositions, but having Baxcalibur over Kingambit, so that was like a very up and coming team. Against that, it was generally just like bring the core four of Kingambit, Flutter Mane, Arcanine, and Amoonguss. It would usually be something like just lead Flutter Arc. That's just like a go-to lead to me in the balance mirror, just because like it gives you a lot of options. You can obviously like put a lot of pressure on like opposing like Arc, Amoonguss, Palafin, Arc, anything like that. You can side wisp your Flutter Mane if you want to avoid a Spore, which happened in quite a couple of my games actually. Just a really solid way to avoid Amoonguss and let it be less of a pressuring Mon. And then another way to just game plan as that is just like lead Arcanine Kingambit. A lot of times they would just lead their own Arcanine, so you just get a free +1 on your Kingambit. Then you can easily just like protect your Kingambit, howl with Arcanine, get it to +2 up for free. Then you can just go for the Dark Terror. You don't really care if you get burnt at that point, because you're at +2. You're still doing insane damage, and now you're still not only are you still doing insane damage, but now you can't be spored because they burnt you, which is actually really really good. It makes Amoonguss a lot less threatening of a Pokemon, because now against Arcanine Kingambit, they can't spore either of you. It forces Amoonguss to likely switch out, which you can call out on. Like overall, it's just I think it was really solid, like balance that also answers opposing balance. I think like Kingambit just did that really really well for those matchups. And Kingambit, I think keeping Swords Dance on Kingambit and still going with that, like ultimately, while it felt like maybe it didn't make sense because of like all the new dark types that came out, and like they all like resist Kowtow Cleave, I think in general it was a good call for anything that felt like kind of off the wall or something that I didn't expect, just because like for things I don't expect, I can kind of just try to out damage them, because if like a lot of like wonky strategies that I'm not prepared for, usually if I can just game plan around getting a Swords Dance up and just one-shotting them, I usually don't have to deal with whatever strategy they're trying to game plan with. So I think that was just it was just ultimately like my if I can answer these defined strategies that we had sort of with these game plans, and I can just sort of rely on Kingambit for the things I have no prep for whatsoever. So that was like ultimately how I would like prep around that, is just kind of support the Kingambit against things that like I wasn't necessarily prepared for. And then against, let me see, I fought like one side spam team, and like my line to that was just kind of lead Ting Lu and just support it from there, just because I don't think there was any way for it to get KO'd by anything on the side spam team. So it was just kind of pollen puffing it with Moongus and just letting it not ever faint or anything like that. But like overall, those are like just general game plans that you would have against like any other like general kind of team. You would just usually account for what they have and then just lead accordingly. But like most of the time, like Flutter Arc or like Flutter or like Arc Kingambit were like my go-to leads. I would say usually just for like most teams, just because it generally answered like a lot of things that they could do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. On that note, do you want to talk about your tournament run? Because you did play, 16 rounds over the course of the weekend at Fort Wayne. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
about some of the notable matchups that you played.
All right. So in my round one, I'd say that's pretty notable because I actually started 0-1 for the day. I faced. Let me see if I can find. I faced Thomas McCree. No, Thaddeus Valentine. Sorry, Thaddeus Valentine
Okay.
was their name. If I can remember correctly, they just had like a standard team, but it was like Tinglu with a Gothitelle and like a Perish mode. And at this point, I was like, not at that point, I wasn't like super certain how to play that because Palafin was still a fairly new mon to me. So I was like afraid to bring it because I was like afraid of getting trapped with a Gothitelle. So like I ultimately just ended up going with like a game plan of like I think I don't know like just Kingambit stuff, but like ultimately like it went back and forth. Ultimately, game three ended up coming down to does he connect a Fissure or not? That's my Kingambit, and ultimately he does connect the Fissure, and yeah, that ultimately just made me start 0-1, which I didn't feel great about. I didn't feel great about starting 0-1, but whatever. We'll shake it off. Hope no, and my opponents in the future don't land Fissure,
Hmm.
and we'll just go from there. I would say round three was notable because I fought a Dash Bund in my round three, and as soon as saw that, and as soon as I realized what Dash Bund wanted to do and how my team actually approached that, I realized I have basically nothing for it. I have four physical attackers. Like it's scar when it was Scarf Chiyu with Grass Terra, and I have four physical attackers. You can't sport with Amoongus. Uh, you can't sport with Amoongus. You can't redirect anything like that. And Palafin it now resists Jet Punch, which like ultimately I had to like make every read correct in order to actually come back from that match, which I still think to this day that was the scariest match I've had at a regional this season. Was against Scarf Chiyu and Dash Bund. So I'm very happy I managed to squeeze out of that because I was definitely prepared to start 1-2 after I saw that. But let me see. In my round seven, I fought Dylan Savalnera, who is probably the first like opponent, in my name that I actually like recognized among the roster. He was my first. He was the first mouse ape that I fought, and the game plan I had the mouse ape was just kind of just very one dimensional. It was just lead Fluttermane Palafin and just Fairy Terra and just Jet Punch Moonblast the mouse and just trying to pick up a one shot on it. Just not let the mouse get off a beat up, potentially pressure a Terra from the Annihilate into like fire or something like that, so I can switch in Palafin and deal with it later. Game plan worked solid. He ended up getting a double protect in turn one, which made things weird, and then he ended up getting a heat wave burn onto my Palafin, which made game one come down to if I can live like enough burn chips on my Palafin, and I ultimately lived like with 2 HP after burn was like all done, and I managed to like barely KO him with wave crash, and I was like, oof. And then game two, basically like the same kind of thing happened, except I didn't get heat wave burn, so I think it ended up being a lot smoother. But so yeah, that was pretty scary. Ultimately, mouse ape was something like that. I just kind of just planned that one lead for, and if it didn't work out, then I was just like kind of not sure what I was gonna do. So I'm kind of happy that it worked out well. Um, and then in my round nine, I did fight Fiona for the first time.
Hmm.
Um, in this matchup, she didn't actually bring Ting Lu, which I think was interesting. Like, not bringing Ting Lu means that there's no Fissure pressure at all, which means Kingambit was kind of free to just set up with Howl and just kind of clean through the team because she didn't have actually much to answer Kingambit outside of Ting Lu. It was mostly just like Chi Yu, but you can answer that with Ting Lu, get some chip on it, then put it in range of Sucker Punch. Um, or like just bring in Palafin and Jet Punch it later. Like I think I just ended up just leading like Kingambit Palafin most of the time and just switching Kingambit Palafin out immediately into something like either Ting Lu or like Arcanine and just kind of going from there. Like I think she said in her interview that she didn't have much of a matchup, and I don't think she really did. I think the team just wasn't structured to beat around the setup Kingambit. So like ultimately that match ended pretty well, like for the most part on that one. Um, and then that was day one. Somehow managed to claw my way back from 0-1 to 8-1, so I was pretty happy about that. So then in my round, let's see, round no, it was 10. Round 10, I fought Nick Safranic. I remember being very scared about this one because I didn't actually realize what the strategy he was going for was until until I saw that he led Chiyu Murkrow. And then as soon as I saw, looked at the team sheet, as soon as I saw Overheat, Sunny Day, and Haze, I'm like, oh, I led horribly. So I ended up losing game one like cleanly because I think I led something um, like Palafin King Gambit or something like that, and ultimately I wasn't able to deal with like the Chi-Yu, and he smartly turned one Terra his Chi-Yu as I tried to go for a cheeky Terra Jet Punch into his Chi-Yu to try and just get a knockout so it wouldn't be an issue, but he smartly Terra'd it so it wouldn't be an issue for him, and ultimately he won that game one. Game two, I just barely brought it back because he actually managed to, I think he missed an overheat on one of my Mons, so I was very lucky in that regard. And then game three, it just came down to just if I can stall out his Sunny Day long enough for Palafin to effectively pressure the Great Tusk in the back, which thankfully I barely managed to do. So I was able to squeak out a KO with Jet Punch and just get that game. Yeah, no, the Sunny Day stuff was very scary overall. Still, I would not want to face that again. And in my round 11, I fought Justin Tang, obviously the winner of the event. And in the game one, I think I played probably some of the best Pokemon I ever played. Like every single turn, I managed to. I think I just called correctly. I called his Palafin switch out into like Amoonguss something. I think I Flare Blitz that slot or something like that. I twisted my own Flutter Mane to avoid a Spore. I ultimately just put on so much pressure that he ended up forfeiting game one with like 3 Mons still left. So I felt pretty good about that. And then in game two, the game two, I tried to get cheeky with I set up Kingambit to +2, and I tried to get a knockout on his Terra Fairy Flutter Mane, which I didn't know was actually super bulky. Like that thing was really, really bulky. It lived with like a good amount left, and I was actually surprised by that. So that actually like ended up being pretty bad because he ended up KOing my Kingambit, so I was like at a deficit from there. But like ultimately, the game came down to like if I could like it came down to me assessing that like Flare Blitzing into a protecting Amoonguss was the right play because he switched out his Chien-Pao into Fluttermane to try and like force a knockout on his own Fluttermane so he can get a free switch back into Chien-Pao. And I just had to assess that was what he had to do, so I didn't let him have that free KO on his Fluttermane, so I just Flare Blitzed into his Amoonguss, got a double knockout after that turn, and then was able to win the game from there. So ultimately in that, aside from Justin Tang, I felt very happy with the way I was playing. Like, he was obviously making very solid turns like throughout the entire game, but like ultimately like the way I felt like I was playing, I felt like I played that matchup really really well. Let me see. And then I think the next match would be the rematch versus Fiona.
Mm-hmm. And this one, of course, was on stream, so everyone got to watch it.
This one was on stream. Everyone watched it. Everyone's made videos about this one game. um, yeah, I don't know much more what I need to. No, I think there is something I have to say. I think she should have clicked Fissure more. I honestly think she didn't click Fissure enough. Like I think there are situations where she like ruinationed or stomping tantrumed or did something when I think she just should have just been cutthroat fissuring my Kingambit turn one. Because if Kingambit is my matchup, if I lose Kingambit, then like I have a lot less than I can actually answer for. So I think ultimately, like obviously getting 4 out of 5 fissure sucked, but I think it should have been realistically been like 4 out of like 7 or 8 because I think you should have just started clicking fissure from turn one and just trying to lock down the Kingambit from there.
Mm-hmm. And like one thing that I will say about your team is that you don't have Iron Head, and you had a pretty good justification for that, but like the lack of Iron Head means that you are very slow at KOing opposing Tinglu with your Kingambit, right? Until you get there eventually, and you probably outdamage it. But if they do have Fissure, like it does sort of have that inevitability, and even though you can spore it, like I think that it is kind of scary, and that maybe you disrespected Fissure with this Kingambit set a little bit. Although that being said, that may just mean that it is only going to get better as the metagame develops and people start dropping Fissure from their team.
Hmm. Yeah, no, not being able to answer Tinglu was like the only like big gripe I probably had with like not having Ironhead or anything like that. Um, like it would suck because like getting the first Fissure off would mean that like I'd have to try and play back from that position, and then like the second I would actually get into like a position where I could play from that's when the opportunity for another Fissure happened. So obviously, like I would say, like this team is slow to KO Kingambit. Not Kingambit, Tinglu, especially if they like Terra, like she had Terra Water, which means Palafin was like a lot less secure of an answer to that. But I ultimately thought like if I could, ultimately if you can just circumvent that by like getting, probably I guess getting a little lucky in your case and just not getting hit by one or two Fissures, you usually would get me the board position to properly play around Tinglu.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of banked on the fact that like I would hopefully not get hit by Fissure most of the time. So that was just something I think I was just willing to bank on, which it didn't work out in like two of my rounds, but I'll take two of my rounds over like the other rounds where I fought a few other Fissure Tinglu, and for the most part they missed their Fissures or hit Fissures that didn't matter. So ultimately I think I was fine with for going with that possibility. Maybe I could consider something like low kick in the future to help more effectively deal with it. But I think next time I'll just try and target down the Tinglu as fast as I possibly can, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. So after that was my it was my win-in against Nails and Nick Navarre. I think we found out after the match that it wasn't actually a win-in because we both had such like really really good resistance. Like you saw, I finished first, so I had like probably one of if yeah, I would have either had the best resistance or like the second best. I think I think I would have if I just lost to Nick because he would have been better in my resistance then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Nick was the highest X3, so his resistance was also really good. So like obviously we still both tried really hard because we wanted to have that like security of that, but this matchup, I've been here. I was hearing about this team the entirety of the event. Like, I heard about Stealth Rocks. I heard about the Solo Dozo. I'm like, there's no way he's using this. And then I see his team. I'm like, oh, he's using this. All right. So after I saw like Yawn and Stealth Rocks, I kind of had, and then he led Tinglu Dozo, I kind of had like the idea of what he wanted to do, which was just set up Stealth Rocks and just kind of yawn cycle people until people just chip themselves down enough to where like his offense in the back would probably clean up. So I ultimately decided that probably it was a situation where I think I just kind of have to cut my own arm off in order to proceed. So I set up a Howl with my Arcanine and my Kingambit. I then Swords Dance with it the next turn as he yawned it, and I just burnt myself with my own Arcanine. Like, I just thought, like, I'm at +3. I'm doing more damage than I would at +1, and now you can't yawn cycle me. So, like, you're not like dealing effectively as much to me just because you're not forcing me to switch out. And Kowtow Cleave like 2-shot via Dozo when it was at +3 burnt. So I just ultimately just brought in a Moongus and just kind of kept pollen puffing myself, avoiding the damage from the Dozo and the Tinglu, and just kind of just went from there. I just kind of clicked Kowtow the rest of the game and then just sucker punched the fast ones in the back. And then game 2, I think he realized that wasn't going to work as effectively because of like how I dealt with it game 1. So I think he just tried to force it like I think he tried to force an offensive option. He forced like his Dragonite in the back, and I think he tried to outrage, and I think it ended up hitting the wrong slot because I think it ended up hitting I don't remember. I think it might hit my Amoonguss or something like that. But I think it was good. It was definitely trying to hit my Arcanine because it missed my Arcanine. Then that allowed me to get a Wisp off onto his Dragonite, and then seeing that his Dragonite was faster than my Arcanine, I was like, huh. It's kind of interesting. He probably has like little to no HP on that thing, so I just ended up like E-speed sucker punching it and then picking the knockout on it, and I think the game was just kind of over from there. But yeah, no, definitely very scary team. I would not want to face it again, but I felt good with setup, especially since the Dozo didn't have Unaware. If the Dozo had Unaware, I think I would have had like very little ways to actually deal with that, so I was very thankful that it was Waterville and not Unaware. But yeah, no, definitely very scary team. And probably one of the most fun matches I had, honestly, in the entirety of the event.
Yeah, he has a team report also on my channel if you want to go hear more about this team. I think Waterville was unaware, definitely something he thought about, but I think he said day one he got whisked 3 times into Dozo because people just don't read the team sheet. So at least day one, it certainly paid off.
That's so funny. I think that's like similar to when people see Serena for the first time and then they priority move into it. They're like, oh, that's funny. So yeah, no. After that, top eight came up, and my first round was against Lev Wiley. Not a name that I'd heard of before, but I heard that he'd like won a regional like back in like 2012 or something like that. So like I think he was like similar to me, had success way back in the past, and is just kind of coming up and coming again. And this was actually my first, dozo with a Tatsugiri of the event. So seeing that it was like Flying Terror and not Grass meant that like, okay, my win con is just bring Palafin in the back, and then like it doesn't even need to be hero form. Just let its like one job be to get a haze off, and then just go from there. It did end up being tricky because he crit my Arcanine with an extreme speed to one shot it, meaning I couldn't get a KO onto his Dragonite. And then it meant like, it was a tricky endgame because he ended up also critting my Amoonguss with an Earthquake to knock it out, meaning I wouldn't get a Haze Spore off, which ended up making the endgame very dicey. It ended up being like, can I get, like, does a Terra Fairy Moonblast from Fluttermane and a Wave Crash from Palafin KO this Dozo at like 90%? And like, thankfully it did. And even then the game didn't end because he ended up getting a Muddy Water Act Drop on my Fluttermane. So I was like, please hit, please hit. And, thankfully it hit. So like all that happened. And like, I somehow thankfully managed to clutch out that game. And then game two, I think he just decided that with Palafin, Dozo mode wasn't very viable. So he just ended up not bringing Dozo altogether and just brought his other 4 Mons. He tried to like, just lead Glamora and just like mortal spin me down and just kind of like clean up with like Chen Pao Dina in the back. I think thankfully it just came down to and in turn, I think in game two, I read that he would try and just go hard into my Flutter, so I protected it as he Ironhead it, which obviously made that so much easier to play around because then he got chipped down. He was forced to switch out his Dragonite because he couldn't Ironhead me faster than I could Moonblast him. Then he ended up having to lock himself into E-Speed to actually get a knockout, which let my Fluttermane come in for free. It was the last 2 months with Chen Pao D-Knight. He was locked into E-Speed, and my Fluttermane was at full HP, so the game was just over from there. So he couldn't really pressure my Fluttermane enough. So yeah, that was top 8, and then we went into top 4 versus Justin Tang. So I was trying to think about how I wanted to go about this rematch because I ended up trying to in turn 1 of game 1, I actually had talked to Justin about the interaction before, how in our other game, my Sucker Punch failed to E-Speed, my Sucker Punch failed to KO his Fluttermane. I told him about how I probably should have just like E-Speed Sucker Punch in that turn because, that would always get the knockout whether he tear it or not. So I just decided I don't think he's going to respect it. So I decided to just go for it again. And, obviously he played it safe and did respect it, which, did put me a lot on the back foot, which meant I had to like just make a lot of hard calls. I ended up like not protecting my Kingambit for like 3 turns in a row while his Fluttermane was on the field. I just knew I had to like kind of try and edge that out by like calling. I knew it always just Shadow Ball my upper slots, which thankfully he did. And then I was hoping that he wouldn't. I don't know if he did notice or noticed after he locked his turn in that Fluttermane would be KO'd by Sucker Punch because Chen Pao was on the field. I just kind of had to bank that he would. And thankfully he did, and Fluttermane was knocked out, which meant I was able to win that game 1 because Ice Spinner wasn't able to KO my Fluttermane. So thankfully the game 1, I made a lot of hard calls, and ultimately it did end up going a lot more in my favor than it did in the turn 1. Game 2, I don't remember much of, but I do remember it just kind of coming down to, do I call his Arcanine or do I call his Palafin to protect and to attack? Ultimately, I ended up attacking into his Palafin as he protected, and I just Sucker Punched into it as he Flare Blitz. Ultimately, that was just I should have trusted my gut because my gut was telling me to attack into the Arcanine, but I was like, I think I'll just go for a read in there, and it didn't work out. So sadly, I lost that game too. And game 3, I felt like I was playing pretty decent. I got myself into like a little bit of an awkward scenario with my Kingambit being put to sleep, but I still thought it was fine because he had Arcanine and Amoonguss on the field. He couldn't actually pressure too much on the field as since I had Arcanine on the field and my Kingambit was asleep. So I predicted that he would switch in his Palathin, so I just attempted to wisp that slot, and sadly the wisp missed. And that put a lot of momentum back in his favor. He was able to KO my Arcanine. Sadly, my Kingambit couldn't get the first turn wake. I think if it did, I still would have been able to just win that game because I would have gotten a KO onto his Palathin, and then I would have been able to just win uh, Moongus Fluttermane back, I think. But yeah, no, sadly, I think that just me missing that wisp ended up turning a lot of momentum back into his favor, and ultimately I wasn't able to clutch that one out. But I still think I played well overall in that match and over the weekend, so I still felt very happy with how I did ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, you got top four out of I think 530 players is what it looked like. Back to back weekends of top four is just an absolutely crazy run, especially in two different formats. So really, really impressive. And again, I think that you had a really, really strong team in both weekends. And I definitely recommend you try it out. It's one of the strongest balanced teams I've seen. And so, yeah, we got the rental code on screen right now. The paste will be in the description down below if you want to try this team out. And so, yeah, congratulations again. And
Thank
did you
you.
have any final words or shout outs that you want to give?
I guess I'll give shout out to my friend Ashton Cox. He drives me to every event, so I think I have to thank him for that. We ended up deciding and using the same team together. So he drives me, we team build together. We banter together, so I can't miss a shot without him. I think I have to thank like all my friends in Gazpacho. Thank Z. Thank Z for the team idea for Howl. Thank you. Sorry I stole your idea, but we all do that all the time. um, I'll thank David. I'll thank Mondo, Cami. Those are just all the people that are there with at the event, just hanging out with. I think for the most part, I think that's it for the shout outs.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the channel. I really appreciate it. And again, definitely recommend that you try this team out. It's, I think, one of the strongest teams in the format right now. And yeah, thank you all for watching. And until next time, I'll see you all later.
Peace.